Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today we're journeying back to the land of pharaohs, pyramids, and the mighty Nile, a civilization that flourished for over 3 millennia. Egypt was a land of incredible innovation, monumental architecture, and profound mysteries. A country with a unique geographical shape can be likened to a lily with a crooked stem. This metaphor beautifully encapsulates the country's physical characteristics and its division into two distinct regions. In shape, Egypt is like a lily with a crooked stem. A broad blossom terminates it at its upper end. A button of a bud projects from the stalk a little below the blossom, on the left-hand side. The broad blossom is the delta, extending from Aboosir to Tineh, a direct distance of 180 miles, which the projection of the coast, the graceful swell of the petals, enlarges to 230. The bud is the Fayoum, a natural depression in the hills that shut in the Nile Valley on the west, which has been rendered cultivable for many thousands of years by the introduction into it of the Nile water through a canal known as the Bahr Yousouf. The long stalk of the lily is the Nile Valley itself, which is a ravine scooped in the rocky soil for 700 miles from the First Cataract to the apex of the delta, sometimes not more than a mile broad, never more than 8 or 10 miles. No other country in the world is so strangely shaped, so long compared to its width, so straggling, so hard to govern from a single center. At the first glance, the country seems to divide itself into two strongly contrasted regions, and this was the original impression which it made upon its inhabitants. The natives from a very early time designated their land as the Two Lands, and represented it by a hieroglyph in which the form used to express land was doubled. The kings were called chiefs of the two lands and wore two crowns as being kings of two countries. The Hebrews caught up the idea, and though they sometimes called Egypt Mazor in the singular number, preferred commonly to designate it by the dual form Mizraim, which means the two Mazers. These two Mazers, two Egypts or two lands, were of course the blossom and the stalk, the broad tract upon the Mediterranean known as Lower Egypt or the Delta, and the long narrow valley that lies, like a green snake, to the south, which bears the name of Upper Egypt, or the said. Nothing is more striking than the contrast between these two regions. Entering Egypt from the Mediterranean or from Asia by the caravan route, the traveler is greeted by an apparently boundless plain. This plain, unbroken by natural elevations, is generally green with crops or marshy plants and is canopied by a cloudless sky. The horizon, flat and distant, rests everywhere, creating an absolute monotony. The landscape lacks alternation of plain and highland, meadow and forest, slopes of hills, hanging woods, dells, gorges, cascades, rushing streams, or babbling rills. Instead, it presents a vast, smooth expanse of rich alluvial soil, varying only in being cultivated or allowed to lie waste. Turning away from the dull uniformity of this featureless plain, the traveler proceeds southwards. At a distance of 100 miles from the coast, an entirely new scene unfolds. Instead of an illimitable prospect, the traveler finds himself in a comparatively narrow vale. The eye still commands an extensive view up and down this vale, but the prospect on either side is blocked at the distance of a few miles by rocky ranges of hills. These hills, white, yellow, or tawny, sometimes draw so near as to threaten an obstruction of the river course, sometimes recede so far as to leave some miles of cultivable soil on either side of the stream. The rocky ranges rise abruptly in bare grandeur, their craggy sides devoid of moss, heather, or trees. They seem intended to keep the inhabitants of the vale within their narrow limits, barring them from any commerce or acquaintance with the regions beyond. Such is the twofold division of the country that impresses the observer initially. However, on a longer sojourn and with more intimate familiarity, the twofold division gives way to a threefold one. The lower valley differs from the upper. It is a sort of debatable region, half plain, half vale. The cultivable surface spreads itself out more widely, and the enclosing hills recede into the distance. Above all, the middle tract belongs to the open space of the Fayoum, nearly 50 miles across in its greatest diameter and containing an area of 400 square miles. Hence, some occupants of Egypt have preferred a triple division to a twofold one, with the Greeks interposing the Heptanomes between the Thebais and the Delta, and the Arabs the Vastani between the Sed and the Bahari, or country of the sea. This dynamic landscape of Egypt, therefore, presents a fascinating study of geographical diversity and evolution. The Egypt that is presented to the viewer in this description is not the Egypt of the maps. The maps mark out Egypt as a broad rectangular space in the northeastern corner of Africa, bounded on two sides by the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, and on the other two sides by two imaginary lines drawn across the sands of the desert. However, this Egypt is a fiction of the geographers, as untrue to fact as the island Atlantis of Greek legend or the Lyonesse of medieval romance, both of which are said to have sunk beneath the ocean to explain their disappearance. The true Egypt, as observed in the old monuments by the Hebrews, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, and its own people in this day, is a mere fraction of this vast area of the maps. It is nothing more than the valley and plain watered by the Nile, for nearly 700 miles by the river's course from the Mediterranean southwards. The great wastes on either side of the Nile Valley are in no sense Egypt. Neither the undulating sandy desert to the west, nor the rocky and gravelly highland to the east, which rises in terrace after terrace to a height, in some places, of 6,000 feet, can be considered Egypt. These areas are sparsely inhabited, and by tribes of a different race from the Egyptians, tribes whose allegiance to the rulers of Egypt is nominal at best, and who for the most part reject the very idea of submission to authority. If, then, the true Egypt is the tract that we have described, the Nile Valley, with the Fayoum and the Delta, the lily stalk, the bud, and the blossom, we can understand why it was said of old that Egypt was the gift of the river. This phrase was first used by the lively Greek historian Herodotus, although he did not divine the exact scientific truth of the matter. Herodotus imagined Africa as originally being doubly severed from Asia by two parallel fjords, one running inland northwards from the Indian Ocean, as the Red Sea does to this day, and the other penetrating inland southwards from the Mediterranean to an equal or greater distance. He believed that the Nile, pouring itself into this latter fjord, had gradually filled it up and had then gone on to turn a large piece of the Sea of the Greeks into land. This was evident from the projection of the shore of the delta beyond the general coastline of Africa eastward and westward. Herodotus was convinced that if the Nile were to divert its waters from their present bed into the Red Sea, it would fill it up and turn it into dry land in the space of 20,000 years, or maybe in half that time, for he recognized the Nile as a mighty and energetic river. However, the method of the Nile's energy has been different than he supposed. The Nile, working from its immense reservoirs in the equatorial regions, has gradually scooped itself out a deep bed in the sand and rock of the desert, which must have originally extended across the whole of northern Africa from the Atlantic to the Red Sea. Having scooped itself out this bed to a depth in places of 300 feet from the desert level, it has then proceeded partially to fill it up with its own deposits. This geographical transformation truly underscores the might and energy of the Nile, shaping the landscape of Egypt as we know it today. When the Nile is at its height, it occupies the entire bed, presenting the appearance of a vast lake or succession of lakes. Every day it deposits a portion of sediment over the whole space it covers. As the river contracts gradually, it leaves at the base of the hills, on both sides or at least on one, a strip of land freshly dressed with mud. This strip gets wider daily as the waters recede, until yards grow into furlongs, and furlongs into miles. Eventually, the shrunk stream is content with a narrow channel a few hundred yards in width, leaving the rest of its bed to the embraces of the sun and air, and, if man so wills, to human industry. The land thus left exposed is Egypt. Egypt is the temporarily uncovered bed of the Nile, which it reclaims and recovers during a portion of each year. During this time, Egypt disappears from view, except where human labor has formed artificial islands by mounds and embankments. These islands raise their heads above the waste of waters, most of them crowned with buildings. However, there is one exception to this broad and sweeping statement. The Fayoum is not part of the natural bed of the Nile and has not been scooped out by its energy. It is a natural depression in the western desert, separated from the Nile Valley by a range of limestone hills from 200 to 500 feet in height. Apart from human activity, it would have been arid, treeless, and waterless. Yet, it derives all its value, richness, and fertility from the Nile. Human energy, at some remote period, introduced the life-giving fluid of the Nile into this depressed tract through an artificial channel, cut in some places through the rock. This fluid, bearing the precious Nile sediment, has sufficed to spread fertility over the entire region, making the desert blossom like a garden. This symbiotic relationship between the Nile and Egypt underscores the transformative power of nature and human endeavor. The Egyptians, from a remote date, were not unaware of the source of their blessings. They speculated on their mysterious river, the Nile, deifying it under the name of Hapi, the hidden. They declared that his abode was not known, that he was an inscrutable god, and that none could tell his origin. They acknowledged him as the giver of all good things, especially the fruits of the earth. Despite its usefulness, beneficence, and essential role in the existence of Egypt, the Nile can scarcely be said to add much to the variety of the landscape or the beauty of the scenery. It is something, no doubt, to have the sight of water in a land where the sun beats down all day long with unremitting force. However, the Nile is never clear. During the inundation, it is deeply stained with the red argillaceous soil brought down from the Abyssinian highlands. At other seasons, it is always more or less tinged with the vegetable matter which it absorbs on its passage from Lake Victoria to Khartoum. This vegetable matter, combined with its depth and volume, gives it a dull, deep hue, preventing it from having the attractiveness of purer and more translucent streams. The Greek name, Nilos, and the Hebrew, Sikr, are thought to embody this attribute of the mighty river, meaning dark blue or blue-black, terms sufficiently expressive of the stream's ordinary color. The size of Egypt, within the limits assigned to it, is about 11,400 square miles, smaller than any European state except Belgium, Saxony, and Serbia. However, magnitude is but an insignificant element in the greatness of states. Egypt is the richest and most productive land in the whole world. In its most flourishing age, it was told that it contained 20,000 cities. It deserved to be called, more probably than even Belgium, one great town, but its area was undoubtedly small. Still, as little men have often taken the highest rank among warriors, so little states have filled a most important place in the world's history. Despite being limited in space, Egypt was blessed with its fertile soil and strategic location. The rich alluvium, continually deepening and top-dressed each year by nature's bountiful hand, was of inexhaustible fertility. It readily bore a threefold harvest each year, first a grain crop, and then 2 crops of grasses or esculent vegetables. The wheat sown returned 100-fold to the husbandman, and was gathered at harvest time in prodigal abundance. Flax and doora were largely cultivated, and enormous quantities of the most nutritive vegetables, such as lentils, garlic, leeks, onions, endive, radishes, melons, cucumbers, lettuces, and the like, were produced. These formed a significant element in the food of the people. The vine was also grown in many places, such as along the flanks of the hills between Thebes and Memphis, in the basin of the Fayoum, at Anthilla in the Mareotis, at Sebennytis, now Semnood, and at Plissine on the shore of the Mediterranean. The date palm, springing naturally from the soil in clumps, groves, or planted in avenues, offered its golden clusters to the wayfarer, dropping its fruit into his lap. Wheat, however, was the chief product of Egypt throughout antiquity, which was reckoned the granary of the world, the refuge and resource of all the neighboring nations in times of dearth, and on which Rome almost wholly depended for her sustenance in the later republican and imperial times. If the soil was thus all that could be wished, the situation was even more advantageous. Egypt was the only nation of the ancient world which had ready access to 2 seas, the Northern Sea, or Sea of the Greeks, and the Eastern Sea, or Sea of the Arabians and the Indians. While Phoenicia might carry her traffic by the painful travel of caravans across 15 degrees of desert from her cities on the Levantine coast to the inner recess of the Persian Gulf, and Assyria and Babylonia might for a time, when at the height of their dominion, obtain a temporary hold on lands which were not their own, Egypt, at all times and under all circumstances, commanded by her geographic position and access both to the Mediterranean and to the Indian Ocean by way of the Red Sea, blessed with its strategic location, had two great outlets for her productions and two great inlets by which she received the productions of other countries. Her ships could issue from the Nilotic ports and trade with Phoenicia, Carthage, Italy, or Greece. They exchanged her corn, wine, glass, furniture, and works in metallurgy for Etruscan vases, Grecian statues, purple Tineh robes, or tin brought by Carthaginian merchantmen from the Scilly Islands and Cornwall. Alternatively, they could start from Hierapolis, Myos Hormuz, or some port further to the southward, and pass by way of the Red Sea to the spice region of Araby the Blessed, the Abyssinian timber region, the shores of Zanzibar and Mozambique, round Arabia to Turdan on the Persian Gulf, or possibly to Ceylon or India. The products of the distant east, even of far Cathay, certainly flowed into the land, as evidenced by the artifacts dug out of the ancient tombs. However, whether these were obtained by direct or indirect commerce remains a matter of speculation. The possession of the Nile was of extraordinary advantage to Egypt, not merely as the source of fertility, but also as a means of rapid communication. One of the greatest impediments to progress and civilization in regions not yet subdued to man's will is the difficulty of locomotion and transport. Mountains, forests, torrents, marshes, jungles form insurmountable barriers in new countries, hindering commerce and causing isolation. Egypt, however, had from the first a broad road driven through it from end to end, a road 700 miles long and seldom much less than a mile wide, which allowed ready and rapid communication between the remotest parts of the kingdom. Rivers are of no use as arteries of commerce or vehicles for locomotion until men have invented ships or boats, or at least rafts, to descend and ascend them. The Egyptians, acquainted with the use of boats and rafts from a very remote period, took to the water readily. 32 centuries ago, an Egyptian king built a temple on the confines of the Mediterranean entirely of stone, which he floated down the Nile for 650 miles from the quarries of Asawin. The passage up the river is for a considerable portion of the year as easy as the passage down. Northerly winds, the famous Etesian gales, prevail in Egypt during the whole of the summer and autumn, and by hoisting a sail, it is almost always possible to ascend the stream at a good pace. If the sail is dropped, the current will at all times take a vessel downstream. Thus, boats, and even vessels of a large size, pass up and down the waterway with equal facility. The climate is unique in all seasons, presents the most astonishing appearance during the period of the inundation. At this time, not only is the lengthy valley from Asawin to Cairo submerged underwater, but the delta itself transforms into a vast lake, dotted with islands that reminded Herodotus of the islands of the Aegean. The elevations, man-made, are mostly crowned with the white walls of towns and villages that sparkle in the sunlight and are sometimes reflected in the flood beneath them. The palms and sycamores stand up out of the expanse of waters, shortened by some 5 or 6 feet of their height. When the inundation begins, inhabitants are seen hurrying their cattle to the shelter provided in the villages. If the rise of the water is more rapid than usual, many rescue their beasts with difficulty, causing them to wade or swim, or even saving them by means of boats. An excessive inundation brings not only animal, but human life into peril, endangering the villages themselves, which may be submerged and swept away if the water rises above a certain height. A deficient inundation, on the other hand, brings no immediate danger, but by limiting production may create a dearth that causes incalculable suffering. However, nature's operations are so uniform that these calamities rarely arise. Egypt rejoices, more than almost any other country, in an equable climate, an equable temperature, and an equable productiveness. The summers are hot, especially in the south, and an occasional sirocco produces intense discomfort while it lasts. But the cool Etesian wind, blowing from the north through nearly all the summertime, tempers the ardor of the sun's rays even in the hottest season of the year. During the remaining months, from October to April, the climate is simply delightful. Egypt has been said to have but 2 seasons, spring and summer. Spring reigns from October into May, crops spring up, flowers bloom, soft zephyrs fan the cheek when it is midwinter in Europe. By February, the fruit trees are in full blossom, the crops begin to ripen in March and are reaped by the end of April. Snow and frost are wholly unknown at any time, Storm, fog, and even rain are rare. A bright, lucid atmosphere rests upon the entire scene. There is no moisture in the air, no cloud in the sky, no mist veils the distance. One day follows another, each the counterpart of the preceding, until at length spring retires to make room for summer, and a fiercer light, a hotter sun, a longer day, show that the most enjoyable part of the year is gone by. The geology of Egypt is indeed simple. The entire flat country is alluvial, with hills on either side that are limestone in the north, sandstone in the central region, and granite and syenite in the south. The granitic formation begins between the 24th and 25th parallels, but occasional masses of primitive rock intrude into the secondary regions, extending northward as far as latitude 27 degrees and 10 minutes. Above the rocks, in many places, are deposits of gravel and sand, the former hard, the latter loose and shifting. A portion of the eastern desert is metalliferous, yielding gold, copper, iron, and lead. Gold is found even today in small quantities and seems to have been more abundant in ancient times. Emeralds abound in the region about Mount Zabara, and the eastern desert further yields jaspers, carnelians, breccia verde, agates, chalcedonies, and rock crystal. The flora of the country, while not particularly diverse, is nonetheless interesting. Dom and date palms are the principal trees, the latter having a single tapering stem, the former dividing into branches. The sycamore, Ficus sycamoris, is also common, as are several species of acacia. The acacia sail, which furnishes the gum arabic of commerce, is a gnarled and thorny tree, somewhat like a solitary hawthorn in its habit and manner of growth, but much larger. Its height, when full grown, is from 15 to 20 feet. The persea, a sacred plant among the ancient Egyptians, is a bushy tree or shrub, which attains the height of 18 or 20 feet under favorable circumstances, and bears a fruit resembling a date, with a subacid flavor. Specially characteristic of Egypt, though not altogether peculiar to it, were the papyrus and the lotus, the Cyperus papyrus and Namphia lotus of botanists. The papyrus was a tall, smooth reed, with a large triangular stalk containing a delicate pith, out of which the Egyptians manufactured their paper. The fabric was excellent, as is shown by its continuance to the present day, and by the fact that the Greeks and Romans, after long trial, preferred it to parchment. The lotus was a large white water lily of exquisite beauty. Kings offered it to the gods, guests wore it at banquets, architectural forms were modeled upon it, it was employed in the ornamentation of thrones. In ancient times, Egypt may not have offered much in the way of exciting amusement for sportsmen. Today, gazelles are chased with hawk and hound during the dry season on the broad expanse of the delta. However, in ancient times, the dense population likely scared off the entire antelope tribe, which could only be found in the desert region beyond the limits of the alluvium. Egypt, in the proper sense of the word, may never have been the home of red deer, roes, or fallow deer, of lions, bears, hyenas, lynxes, or rabbits. Animals of these classes may have occasionally appeared in the alluvial plain, but they would only have been rare visitors driven by hunger from their true habitats in the Libyan or Arabian uplands. The crocodile and the hippopotamus, however, were actually hunted by the ancient Egyptians, who also indulged their love of sport in fowling and fishing. Waterfowl of all kinds are abundant in the Nile waters at all seasons, especially frequenting the pools left by the retiring river: pelicans, geese, ducks, ibises, cranes, storks, herons, dotterels, kingfishers, and sea swallows. Quails also arrive in great numbers in the month of March, though there are no pheasants, snipe, woodcocks, or partridges. Fish are plentiful in the Nile and the canals derived from it, but there are not many kinds which afford much sport to the fishermen. Altogether, Egypt is a land of tranquil monotony. The eye commonly travels either over a waste of waters or over a green plain unbroken by elevations. The hills which enclose the Nile Valley have level tops and sides that are bare of trees, shrubs, flowers, or even mosses. The sky is generally cloudless. No fog or mist enwraps the distance in mystery. No rainstorm sweeps across the scene. No rainbow spans the empyrean. No shadows chase each other over the landscape. There is an entire absence of picturesque scenery. A single broad river, unbroken within the limits of Egypt even by a rapid, two flat strips of green plain at its side, two low lines of straight-topped hills beyond them, and a boundless open space where the river divides itself into half a dozen sluggish branches before reaching the sea, constitute Egypt. However, the monotony is relieved in two ways, and by two causes. Nature herself does something to relieve it. Twice a day, in the morning and in the evening, the sky and the landscape are lit up by hues so bright yet so delicate that the homely features of the prospect are at once transformed as if by magic, and wear an aspect of exquisite beauty. At dawn, long streaks of rosy light stretch themselves across the eastern sky. The haze above the western horizon blushes a deep red. A ruddy light diffuses itself around, making walls, towers, minarets, and cupolas glow like fire. The long shadows thrown by each tree and building are purple or violet. A glamour is over the scene, which seems transfigured by an enchanter's wand. But the enchanter is nature, and the wand she wields is composed of sun rays. Again, at eve, nearly the same effects are produced as in the morning, only with a heightened effect. The redness of flames passes into the redness of roses. The wavy cloud that fled in the morning comes into sight once more, comes blushing, yet still comes on, comes burning with blushes, and clings to the sun god's side. Night in Egypt brings a fresh transfiguration. The olive afterglow gives way to a deep blue-gray. The yellow moon rises into the vast expanse, casting a softened light over earth and sky. The orb of night walks in brightness through a firmament of sapphire. If the moon is below the horizon, then the purple vault is lit up with many-colored stars. A profound silence reigns around. A phase of beauty wholly different from that of the daytime smites the senses. The monotony of feature is forgiven due to the changefulness of expression and the experience of a new delight. Man has also done his part to overcome the dullness and sameness that brood over the land of Mizraim. Where nature is most tame and commonplace, man is tempted to his highest flights of audacity. As in the level Babylonia where he aspired to build a tower that should reach to heaven, so in Egypt he strove to startle and surprise by gigantic works, enormous undertakings, enterprises that might have seemed wholly beyond his powers. These have constituted in all ages, except the very earliest, the great attractiveness of Egypt. Men are drawn to Egypt, not by the mysteriousness of the Nile, or the mild beauties of orchards and palm groves, of well-cultivated fields and gardens, no, nor by the loveliness of sunrises and sunsets, of moonlit skies and stars shining with many hues, but by the huge masses of the pyramids, the colossal statues, the tall obelisks, the enormous temples, the deeply excavated tombs, the mosques, the castles, and the palaces. The architecture of Egypt is its great glory. It began early and it has continued late. But for the great works, strewn thickly over the whole valley of the Nile, the land of Egypt would have obtained but a small share of the world's attention, and it is at least doubtful whether its story would ever have been thought necessary to complete the story of the nations. As we conclude this exploration of Egypt's unique geography, we are left with a profound appreciation for the country's natural beauty and man-made wonders. Thanks for sticking with me till the end. If you liked the video, hit the like button and consider subscribing for more amazing content. See you in the next one.